So, you've signed up for a humanities class, and you may be asking yourself, what in the heck are humanities anyway? And because of that, I've decided to prepare a short video to kind of go over generally what all the humanities entail. My name is Professor Amy Young, and this is a global cultures course. So, what are the humanities? The humanities are forms of human expression. And that human expression can include all sorts of artistic forms. So, for instance, included in the humanities are the visual arts, and those can include things that you're quite familiar with, like painting and sculpture and architecture. But the list goes on and on. All things that are visual and artistic might fit into this category. Another area of the humanities is literature. And here you would find novels and poems and plays. But again, there are lots of other items that we could add to this list. Then there are the performing arts, which can include things like film and theater and dance. And once again, the list goes on. There's also philosophy, and philosophy can include those philosophical thinkers that you're familiar with, like Plato, Aristotle, Descartes. But they can also include philosophical ideas like religion or political theory or mythology. All sorts of things can fit into this category too. And then finally, the humanities includes music, and music can be instrumental, it can be vocal, it can be in any form, but music is also an artistic form of human expression. A lot of people also include history in the humanities, and in this class, we use history as a framework to examine these forms of artistic expression. So there is history, but it's not typically the focus of this course. So, why do we study the humanities? Can you think of any reason? I mean, why not just read a history book? Why not just read statistics and facts about various cultures and eras? The reason that we study the humanities is because we can then understand humanity and the human experience beyond facts and statistics. I'm assuming that many of you would agree that music, for instance, can speak to people, can share messages, can share feelings without even sharing words. And many times the art can express something of the human experience across language barriers, across time. So the humanities give us a different way to explore human culture. So, what do the humanities reveal about culture? Well, first, it's probably a good idea to define what culture is, because, like the humanities, culture is a big, gooey concept. But one textbook describes culture as the values and behaviors shared by a group of people, developed over time, and passed down from one generation to the next. So, culture are those habits, those beliefs, those values that are shared by individuals that shape their experience while they're alive. In order for us to understand the humanities or those forms of human expression in this class, we look at them from a couple of angles. First, we examine cultural context, and that's very often where we're going to see the history coming up in this course. So we need to know what's happening in an era or in a location when the expression is born, when somebody is creating, what is happening around them, what is inciting them to create. Also, what's happening in the creator's life when he or she makes this creation? Because just as creations can be an expression of a culture at large, they can also be an expression of an individual experience. Again, this is one of the wonderful things about the humanities is that they can share something that's very personal or they can share something that's universal. We also want to consider what sort of beliefs and values have shaped this expression. So, is this creator biased in some way? What is this creator's experience and what has shaped their beliefs and their understanding of the world around them? This also helps us understand the human experience and helps us understand the expression that they've created. Then the other way we examine the humanities is via cultural artifacts. So once we understand the context or we kind of understand the environment from which these art forms are born, we look at the art forms themselves. And this is what we would refer to as artifacts. So we want to look at how something was made. Um, if it uses innovative materials or techniques, sometimes art forms are also created using materials that are important to the individual or the culture. So, again, we can learn something about them and what they value by looking at techniques and materials. Then we want to look at the artistic form itself, how it's sharing a message. So, is there anything symbolic about the work, its mood or its tone? This can be color that's used in paintings, it can be language that's used in writing, and all of these can be great subversive communicators. They can share things without being absolutely direct about what they're sharing. And that allows us, as the viewer or the person who's taking in the humanities on the other side, to translate that through our personal experience. And that's where it touches our human side. That's where we have empathy for these creators. Additionally, you want to consider how the artifact is using artistry. So, how is it being artistic with language or imagery or tone? These can also convey values and beliefs. What a creator chooses to emphasize reveals something about what's important to them. So, looking closely at an artifact, we can learn a lot about a culture. So I wanted to give us an opportunity to just get like a real quick practice view of the humanities. There are some items, some artifacts in here that we can look at closely, and I can give you some of the cultural context for. And this will give you a little bit of a taste of what we'll be doing going forward, perhaps, well, definitely more in depth with various cultures. So this first piece is a piece of street art by a street artist named Banksy, and the piece itself is called Slave Labor. It was created in 2012, and around this time in the UK, which is where this was created, they were celebrating the Diamond Jubilee for Queen Elizabeth, and it was also around the time of the London Olympics in 2012. So there was a lot of celebration of Great Britain in particular happening, and as you can see, these little flags with Union Jacks on them are indicative of that celebration. This piece was actually created, rather, using Union Jacks that had been hung up on a residential wall in London. And those were taken down and added to this stencil to make a statement. So, street art in and of itself has a culture. Street art is art for the public. It's very often critical of culture, and it's trying to call our attention to something we might otherwise ignore. Additionally, street art is a direct response to all of the imagery that we're sort of assaulted with every day. So I imagine you've driven down a freeway and you've seen on that freeway billboards that are advertising all kinds of things to you, maybe some things that you're interested in, very often things that you are not, but you didn't ask to see those images. They were put up for public view and they're asking you to be a consumer. Street artists confront this consumer culture. They try to reclaim public space. And again, they're very often critical of society and critical of consumer culture in general. So this piece is created using the street art technique of spray paint and stencil. It's put in a public place for all of the public to view, and it's created using what's already existing in the public there. The piece is called Slave Labor, and it's calling attention to the fact that the labor that created all of these little Union Jack flags was perhaps child labor, and it was in a country that may have once been colonized. And it is something that people ignore as they go out and buy these sort of cheap party favors to hang up and celebrate. So the piece itself is commenting on culture. The way that it's done is commenting on culture. And public art is meant to be owned and viewed by the public. So when this piece was covered up and removed and someone tried to sell it, the public revolted. They said that it was created for them in their neighborhood and it was not anyone else's right to sell it. Another area of the humanities that's interesting to explore is music. We don't always get a chance to explore music in this class, but when we do, we need to be paying close attention, just as close attention as we would to, say, this piece here. So, one piece that is especially interesting to explore for that sort of tone and mood and message is the song "Summertime." This version of Summertime is performed by Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, but the song originally comes from an opera called Porgy and Bess. Porgy and Bess it premiered in 1935, and it features the story of poor Black culture in America's South. So, if the setting is in the 1920s, and while Blacks in the South in the 1920s are technically free, we know that they weren't actually free. In fact, there was still quite a bit of systemic racism happening, and it was not an awesome life. Porgy and Bess, however, shows two sides to this life, at least two sides to this life. One side that is the struggle, and one side that is the celebration. So, this opera showcases a Black life that a lot of America might not have otherwise seen. When it came out in 1935, it was not terribly popular. Many people didn't get it, especially the opera crowd. And it didn't reach wide acclaim until the 1970s, sometime after the Civil Rights Movement. In fact, it became famous when it was performed by the Houston Grand Opera in 1976. Since then, it has been a very popular opera, and I believe it just recently went off Broadway again, as it has reached popularity once again in our time. So, this one song from this one opera is pretty revealing about the overall mood of the opera itself, and then maybe the overall mood of Black culture, and maybe even the overall mood of human culture. The song, called Summertime, brings to mind some interesting notions. So, for instance, if you stop for a moment and you think about summertime, probably you think that it's hot. And when there's not, say, a global pandemic happening, you might also think of things like going to the beach or having fun or being lazy. But it's not typically a stressful word or a sad word. It has positive connotations associated with it. But this song it plays with that idea. It plays with the idea that summertime should be joyful. And I just wanted to play a short clip of it here for you. And then I want you to pay attention to the mood of the music. The lyrics are summertime and the living is easy, the fish are jumping and the cotton is high. So even that sounds like should be a good time. But listen to the music and see how you think it pairs with those words and maybe what you think of when you think of summertime. So, what did you think? Did it sound like a day at the beach? More likely, what you heard was something sad, something mournful. And maybe you notice the sort of ominous backbeat in the song too, like something is looming in the background, like maybe they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And maybe that's life, right? Even when you're having a good time, even when it's summertime, maybe there's always some trouble just around the corner. Or maybe when you're in the midst of trouble, there's always a summertime around the corner because life isn't black and white. It's kind of gooey, and so are our human experiences. Now, this song is so popular and has such universal appeal that it's been covered thousands of times by various artists. One such artist is the group Sublime, who covered the song and called it Doin' Time. And doing time includes that same ominous backbeat. It's not discussing what it's like to be poor in the rural South in the 1920s. Instead, it's discussing what it's like to be poor and on the wrong side of the tracks in the 1990s in Long Beach, California. But the sentiment is still there. There are both joys and there is grief. And that is one of the lasting effects of the mood of this song. And this is one of the ways that music can convey human emotion. One other area of the humanities that we should explore is literature. And here I've included a poem by the poet Sappho called The Virgin. So, for some historical context on Sappho, we should know that she is an ancient Greek poet. And she actually was a teacher. So she taught students on the island of Lesbos. And it was thought that she had romantic interludes with her students, which actually in ancient Greece wasn't all that strange at all. In fact, homosexual relationships and sexual relationships between students and teachers were kind of common. But it's from her that we get the words lesbian and sapphic because of her famous relationships with her students. This poem was written around 600 BCE, so several millennia ago, and it relays something of universal human emotion. So even though Sappho is writing in a very different time and in a very different place, her language is something that we can still relate to. So here is the poem. Like a sweet apple reddening on the high tip of the topmost branch and forgotten by the pickers. No, beyond their reach. Like a hyacinth crushed in the mountains by shepherds, lying trampled on the earth, yet blooming purple. So here, the language is the artistry. If we look at some of the images that she's using here, we get an idea how Sappho feels about the Virgin. So the Virgin is a sweet apple reddening on the high tip of the topmost branch. She's something that is desired, something that is sweet and wonderful, but out of the reach of most people. She's above most people. And while it may seem as though she's been forgotten, in fact, she's just better than they are. She's beyond them. And then there's a second image. The second image is that of a hyacinth crushed in the mountains by shepherds. And if you don't know what a hyacinth is, it's a very beautiful purple flower. So these shepherds walking through the mountains hadn't noticed it, stepped on it, crushed it, trampled it, as she describes. Yet even though it's been forgotten, it's been trampled, it's still blooming purple. So it's still beautiful, and it's still offering that beauty to the world. So Sappho's Virgin has all sorts of beautiful nature imagery associated with it, and it also relays something of human emotion. And we can see that she truly values this virgin that she's describing, even though the society that she lives in may not. And that is what the humanities are. So we're going to be doing that with all sorts of different cultures, all sorts of different artifacts. But remember, you want to understand the cultural context and you want to look closely at the artifacts as we move forward. Generally, the humanities is a lot of different areas of study, and there is so much to explore. And I hope that you're just a little bit curious.